Hello and welcome to the Engineer Your Leadership, Success, Life Harmony. I don't even know what I'm saying this morning because I traveled from Victoria this weekend and I don't even know my own podcast name. So welcome to the Engineer Your Success, Leadership, and Life Harmony Like a Mother show. There you go. I got it right. I'm your host, Kenya Romanovska, award-winning investigative journalist turned maternity leave and working motherhood strategist. And we are here to bring solutions to the motherhood penalty and to turn it into your greatest advantage. You know that when you become a parent, all of a sudden you have 2 full-time jobs, but not twice the time. And that can hit you hard in all of the areas of your life. And we want to turn this time of difficulty for you into a catalyst for transformation and building the life that you desire and deserve for you and your family. And I'm happy to have a special guest today, Sue Rose Reed. She is a mom of 3, a professional engineer and inventor, the owner of One Berry. And we are going to be talking about all things dual career planning, inclusive gifts for expectant parents. I'll start with a little Sue Rose. Don't worry, I'll give you the mic in just a second. But right before the podcast,
Perfect.
We were talking behind the scenes about the experiences of people who are caregivers to children, but may not necessarily be like you and me, right? And so I give birth to my children, but there are other people who are partners, or they're same-sex couples, or maybe even single parents. And the whole conversation today is about creating a more inclusive environment for people who care for children. And so Sue Rose's design is all about that. She will tell you all about her journey as an engineer, as a mom, as an inventor, and why she created her product. And also we will talk about her dynamic with her partner at home, right? Because ultimately we can't, as women or people who give birth, we can't just lean in at home without having a village that leans in at home as well. There's a lot to fill there. And so we have to make that conversation more inclusive to partners, in my case, the father of my child, right? And for many of you, that's the case, but not for everyone. So tell me about you. I have your bio written down, but I think I've been talking for long enough here. Can you tell me about yourself, the things that I didn't mention, what you love to do outside of work as well, about your family, engineering, whatever you want people to know about you, Sue Rose?
Okay. So I live in Invermere, BC. I left the city 12 years ago now. And One Berry was created to bring more of the family conversation together and empower families with better tools that elevated the ordinary that we've been so used to living with. I have 3 babies, 11, 9, and 5, and they have inspired this journey mostly. But
babies, I love it. It's in your heart.
It is. I love babies. I have probably bathed myself hundreds of babies just in prototyping. You know, as engineers, we're always taught like process is the key, and you have to reiterate and you have to revise and like find the small details on how to make the process better. And you know, that was the funnest part of this journey, having babies and having my community of babies around me, is really figuring out the process of bath time so that it is logical, and then that we have tools to support that logic. Because, you know, if there's one thing that's true in the first 2 months of having a baby, whether you're a woman or a man, all logic leaves the brain. You know, it is your survival instincts kick in, your emotional instincts kick in, and all of your logical instincts get put to the side because there has to be room for this new baby. So it's, you know, and so as a full circle, we've come to this point where we're now sharing the why and what else does these experiences bring, and that's a big part of One Berry.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Fun stuff. I wonder, yeah, they're still my babies. I hold my middle son right now, because we have a 5-month-old baby at home. He's like, I want to be a baby again. They notice what baby does to get attention, and they want the same to be able to coo, scream and get what they want. But
yes,
I'll do that.
Oh, they're smart, those little ones.
They are so smart. So like they're also crawling on the floor. Can you imagine? My baby's not crawling yet, but my two sons have started crawling a little bit from time to time. Not all
So
the time.
smart.
So smart. So the title of our podcast is actually STEM Fathers, Engineer Happiness in Your Home. Oh, I think there was, you froze for a second. There you go. There you go. You're back. So you were laughing, but I didn't see you laughing on screen. So our title is actually STEM Fathers, Engineer Happiness in Your Home. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about when the towel, fathers,
Yes.
bath time. Why are we talking about fathers today as two mothers here? What's the significance of this conversation?
You know, the important question to ask is, you know, if we aren't empowering fathers to be caregivers, how are we empowering mothers to stay in the workforce, to stay ambitious, to stay on their journey of careers? And how do they, if we're not empowering the one who traditionally wasn't the caregiver, like as mothers, we are traditionally caregivers, but if we're not starting to change that conversation, if we're not empowering the non-birthing parent, how are we empowering the birthing parent? And I think that piece has been missing for so long. You know, it's the status quo is very much what we know. Like, you know, there's a reason why there are coined phrases like the motherhood penalty and, you know, the motherhood gap as a negative. And, you know, it's all surrounds motherhood, but mothers have partners who create a family. And so if we're starting to investigate and challenge the status quo, how do we bring the whole family and the responsibilities of that family together? And fathers and non-birthing partners are a huge aspect of that.
So that sentence was such a good summary. Can we repeat it? If we don't empower fathers or partners to be caregivers, then how can you say that again? Because that was just the...
How are we empowering mothers to continue to ambitiously fuel their passions and their careers and their and the ability to work?
Yeah. If we're not empowering fathers to...
If we're not empowering
Yeah, because we've had the lean in movement for women. And I've been thinking about that a lot because I've hired full-time help at home, essentially, so I can run my business and enjoy my family. And it's a full-time job to run and operate a home, and the mental load, the domestic load, the emotional labor. It's way too much. I work with almost exclusively engineers right now, and we've processed the heck out of working motherhood. And still, you know, I help them really optimize their performance. And unfortunately, though, I see that the math barely maths when it comes to the number of tasks that have to be performed. And so there's this vacuum at home. Personally, I only one of the solutions I see is really having a lot of help at home in some capacity. That's a whole other discussion. But we've had the lean in movement for women, but we haven't had the lean in at home movement for partners.
That's right. That's right. They're not part of the conversation yet, or they are part of the conversation, but in a very quiet, you know, realm. And there are a lot of dads who are like, oh, I love it. I do all these things. I do bath time. I make dinner, right? And we're not talking about the anomalies of that. We have to remember that that is a very small percentage of the equation. There are always going to be the outliers on a bell curve, right? It's what does the majority experience, and how do we lean into that group to know that it is okay, and that there's a different way, or, you know, spark curiosity for how do we bring happiness in home.
Tell me more about that majority, because, you know, now that you've mentioned it, I've met quite a few fathers who are like, oh yeah, I could totally be a stay-at-home dad. And they have professions and careers, but for sure, you know, I'm happy for my wife to be working full time, and I could totally be a stay-at-home dad, but she's not letting me,
Right.
for example. So can you tell me about that? Can you tell me, and this is anecdotal evidence, by the way, I don't have enough data to say
Yes.
the percentage, but when you're talking about the majority, what are you noticing then in the majority? And you've worked with so many families and designed a product for so many and tested it. So what do you see in the majority of these households that you've interacted with?
It's very much like, I was born in 1983. It is very much a boomer. Like my parents are the boomers, and so it is very much the same status quo of traditional family unit. Dad works, mom raises children. There's still so many non-birthing parents who do not disclose that they are becoming parents at work, whether it be for fear or for privacy reasons or for family dynamic reasons, whether they're LGBTQ, adopting, surrogate, right? Like there's so many different ways of having a family, and the majority still is quiet about what that family piece looks to them. And even in the workplace, men and women are seen as individuals, and yet over 73% of them are caregivers in some capacity, which means they have a shared responsibility, whatever the case may be. And so the majority is still, they are invisible, because you can't force people to tell you what their family dynamic is, but the culture that we're living in doesn't allow them to authentically and worry-free say, hey, I'm going to be a dad, or I'm going to adopt, or and so without having the opening for them and the water cooler talk for them to feel accepted, that's where they live. That's where the majority lies. And that's a sad part, because, we have so much information on how parenthood affects non-birthing partners, as well as we have tons of information on birthing partners or parents. But for non-birthing, I mean, even for dads alone, like the dads experience postpartum depression and anxiety, and 1 in 10 is before or just after baby's born. And then 25% will experience it within the first 6 months. But those, a big part of that is like, stress, that feeling of, what does society think of me? What is my work going to say? I'm tired. Like, it's just, there's this invisible group that is the majority. And it's how do we bring them out in a respectful way?
Yeah. Yeah. And the sleep deprivation too, right? It's a huge identity shift. I was at a conference for women in STEM fields and trades the last weekend, and some shared the experiences of their husbands who worked in, like, for lack of a better word right now, very macho fields where the mom and baby is pretty much almost dying at the hospital. And then the father was too afraid to mention at work, and he was struggling, right? He was
absolutely.
But there was not a culture where he could feel comfortable opening up because of that old paradigm. And I talked about it with my husband too, who works in education. And he every time we had a baby, he talked about it and people were happy for him. And the majority of people he works with are women, but still we've been having these conversations by the coffee machine where he's been preparing a workshop that talk about a father's experience and their identity. And he says, Kenya, I mean, the models I saw growing up is I didn't see my father negotiating with my mom. That just wasn't the model. Or you certainly didn't negotiate with your kids. And so there's this huge identity shift that's happening for men, but not tons of comfort in bringing it into conversations. And I always clients, they say, is there something like that for dads? And yet there's still, I've had a courageous father, I will say courageous, and they ask for the support, and we're starting to work in more depth, but it's just not, it doesn't seem to be socially accepted to talk about this stuff. You're supposed to be like tough and have it all figured out. So tell me about then your process, and how, from what I remember from our conversations, it's a process that's more inclusive and that allows people to claim their gift in a more
Yes.
discreet way. So tell us all about that, and we will dive into, I'll start the conversation at the top. How can the experience of a towel and claiming your gift begin the reflection on engineering happiness in your home as a father and claiming that identity?
Yes. So our program that we work with, I mean, I am a true believer that everything starts at home. So equality starts at home. I grew up very much in a traditional home. My dad worked during the day, and my mom was the caregiver during the day, but my mom worked at night as well. And like what kids see from a very young age is what they believe equality is. And that's what their subconscious will nurture, so that when they go out into the world, it either will be validated or it will be challenged. And so how we're bringing that into the corporate world and having that conversation around equality is we partner with organizations who want to eliminate the toll of disclosure when it comes to recognizing and celebrating families. And so an organization will come to us and they'll say, we want to celebrate all of our expecting employees. And what we do is we gift on behalf of your company one of our bath sets that covers, the whole process and having a very tear-free and easy bath time. And these employees can claim it for themselves. So they don't have to tell their managers. They don't have to seek that personal approval of someone else. And I've heard so many stories from launching our program, whether it be solo adoptee parents or solo parents or LGBTQ, where, it's not that they don't want to tell work because, they're having a baby. They're fine with that. It's just they don't want to become the spokesperson of their life by telling, right? It's not just one thing that prevents somebody from telling work that they're having a family or challenges the perspective. It's a lot of the time there's multiple things that prevent someone from sharing. And so this way mitigates the privacy factor. Even for us, like we ship directly to their homes. Yes. But when we say invoice for the utilization, all these employees they're not named, they're numbers. It's, here's 30 orders a month, right? We don't tell your employer that you're having a baby either. And there's that loyalty and that goodwill is a fuel for acceptance, recognition, culture, right? And so that's how our program works. And so it's very easy, but it really, there's a statistic that says 4% of women of reproductive age is having a baby at any given time. So in a workplace, it's 4% of the workplace. It just might not be the woman or the carrying partner, right? It might be the father, it might be the partner, it might be anybody. And when you look at that number, even for, say it just for easy math, right? Like in 1,000-person company, you're going to get 40 babies a year. And maybe, depending on your female to male ratio, right, you're gonna see just over half. But what about the rest? You'll never know until their benefits or their insurance or whatever changes. So it's how do we make a bigger space? And that's in essence what diversity and inclusion is, right? And so to your second question, how can a towel help fathers and non-birthing parents as caregivers? Well, it's, parenthood is a learning journey. Like none of us, mothers included, none of us really know what we're doing.
In the beginning,
until
right? Like my third, I'm like, I have an idea what I'm doing. I feel pretty confident with my decision.
Totally.
My third.
But it's still so different. right? And you still choose different things. It's like, I'm going to try this. And parenthood is much harder in practice than it is in principle, right? Or what they show you in prenatal, or what they show you in, I watched What to Expect When You're Expecting, the movie, before I had my first. And I was like, okay, this is going to be great. No, that's not how it's going to be. And so it is a learning journey, no matter whether it's your first, your second, your third. I mean, my third, like maybe you'll have this too, Kenya, but my third, we did things totally different because we knew more. And so we tried different things, but like, we also didn't know how those would turn out. It was just, we kind of had a supportive proof of trying something different, and so our products were created to empower connection. And most non-birthing parents, most fathers, they detach because they're not the lifeline, right? Like a carrying mother, there's breastfeeding, co-sleeping, like we are a lifeline to our babies. And a lot of non-birthing partners don't know how they can participate without removing that lifeline bit, right? But we've started, like there's formula feeding or pumping, and then dad feeds baby. And there's tools for that. And so our towels have become a tool so that dads, non-birthing parents doing bath time can be a very connected, very vulnerable bonding experience. And I've seen this thing where it's like moms can do bath time better than me. A lot of dads are eager to just be like, okay, you do bath time because you have this psychological, intrinsic superpower, woohoo magic that you can do bath time for. Right. And it's like, no, I'll just fumble my way through it and figure it out and then practice and practice. And so, our towels have become a fuel to the practice and the connection. And we all know practice fuels progress, progress fuels competency, and competency fuels confidence. And so it is the tool that starts the chain of those things. And it gives non-birthing partners a very special moment to connect with their babies and giving them that empowerment to participate.
Yeah. I can think about how special. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Go on. Okay. Are you sure you're finished with your thought?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. When I think about my daughter, I would say that dad has done 95% of bath time, and it's their time. It's their special time. And I have my involvement in the bedtime routine, but he's the one who bathes her. I feed her, but he's the creaming. He'll put her in
yes.
her crib, right? Even actually when I was traveling to Victoria, I said, ooh, you got to prime me because you're the one who's got the sleep routine, right? And
yes.
I'll do the feeding, and I've done some pumping, but it's just, I find it, I admire women who pump.
Oh, I couldn't pump. I couldn't do it.
Because you have to, okay, we're going to do a little sidetrack here because we're no, but you have to time it so well to, I guess there's probably a specific science on how to do it, but if you fed your baby, and you got to make sure you pump between the next feeding and
right
at the right time of the day.
And the efficiency, right? Yeah. The efficiency it plays a huge role. I was not efficient in the process of pumping. And so, all those things, like it is, side note, it is superhero status.
Conversation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't pump out of, I don't want to say laziness. I don't want to label myself like that. But somebody also has lent me a really good pump, which is amazing. Now it's helped with this baby. So yeah, it's a really special time for them to bond. And he's had a close relationship with all of our kids. Our second was born and the pandemic started a few months later, and he would take them on a lot of hikes. And his identity as a father is the most important to him. He said that, right? And so he's claimed that space, he's claimed that identity, but he's also in a space that supports him. He's, if you want to call him progressive, we can call him that. And still there's that unrecognized huge identity shift. And then how do you navigate life when your partner has a demanding career? Like, I have a demanding career, and we hear from fathers, hey, my wife has a super demanding career, and I don't know how to support her. I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know how to navigate this dynamic. It's quite unprecedented in history, right? So let's have I don't know if you want to add to that. I have a couple more questions for you that we have here. But did you want to add something to that?
Well, I have a question. So did your husband do bath time when your babies were, what age, how old were your babies when he did bath time? Was it right from the beginning?
I can speak for last daughter, because everything else is kind of like a blur for the rest. I do not know my postpartum after my son, but for our daughter, I might have done, and we waited with the bath.
Yeah, of course.
Right, like for actually, full disclosure, you know what, I'll share it, for a few weeks, because my first had terrible eczema and I was concerned about how hard the water was, right? So maybe I did the first 1 or 2 in the beginning, just to get started, something.
And then he took over.
I'll give my daughter a bath. Finally, I'm ready for it. But he took over pretty much very early in the process, like extremely early in the process. Yeah.
Yes, and that is huge, and that and again, it comes back to that families thrive together, right? And you and his personality obviously complement in the way that you were like, no, you can do this. You want to do this. This is you, right? But there's it's that dynamic that plays a huge role. So a big part of it is knowing how you and your partner dance with that dynamic, and those conversations. Maybe if not even having them full on, like, are you going to do bath time, or am I going to do that? Like, what am I going to do and what are you going to do? But just the openness to letting the partner fail forward, right? Because we and it's not even failing; it's just building that practice to confidence.
Practice, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is nice for me to go. I have this last question on my list, and we can work our way up through the beginning. But I wanted to discuss tips for fathers wanting to embrace fatherhood in their professional brand. I talk about that a lot for mothers, and being strategic about how you bring motherhood to conversation when you disclose pregnancies. I mean, I hope that my daughter listens to this and being like, Kenya, this is silly, because why would you have to be strategic about motherhood and, be all planning about it? Ultimately, I know that especially in STEM fields, there are implications. Oh goodness, there's somebody who shared a story with me about when she disclosed her pregnancy. I don't know if I can share this publicly, but like, there was a very extreme reaction on the part of their employer to removing them from the field in a very dramatic fashion. Right. I'm going to say. So yeah, you have to be, and you have to be strategic. You have to think about what are your career goals? What are your family goals? Do you have a supportive manager? What are your company's policies? There's a lot of safety implications when you work in the field, and then there's liability and insurance. So you have to be strategic in terms of why you're working, and if you're biologically going to like disclose that, or even if you're, even if you're not pregnant, there are still implications for that. So we talk about being strategic about how you incorporate your motherhood in your personal brand. You focus on the skills it helps you develop, right? And how you provide even more value to the company now that you're a caregiver. These are kind of the broad strokes. But for fathers, if you want to embrace that in your personal brand, I've worked with a lot of people in more progressive family cultures, but I think it sounds like it's still a minority, right? So for people who want to be more vocal and incorporate it, what tips would you like to give to them?
I think a big, so I do have 3. So one is be curious, right? There's always, delivery is just as important as the reception. And so you have to be curious on, if you say you're telling work, like, who are you telling? What do you know about them? Because we live in this world that's just so self-centered, right? Like we think, okay, I'm in this space, it's my version of a world. This is just how I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to think about, what's on the receiving end, or how that dynamic works, or what the reception is going to be. And I think one of the biggest things is be curious about about all of the things fatherhood, and asking the questions that come up. Like, don't be scared to ask them. Don't be afraid to investigate, or to read, or to learn, or seek out somebody who might be able to assist you, but really have it so that you're not just kind of with your blinders on asking a question. Like, really be open to all of the reception. Because the world is not built, they're putting in change tables now in men's change rooms and stuff like that. But like, I took a few dads to be like, why isn't it in both? Right. And using that curiosity. 2 is, we got to turn off the scoreboard. Right? Men, fathers, human nature, we all have a scoreboard. And while in some places the scoreboard is very appropriate, right? On the pitch, even at work, the scoreboard might be appropriate in some cases, but at home, there should be no scoreboard. There's no points, there's no positioning. And because everything starts at home, right? You have to, making it part of your professional brand is, how do you navigate that counting bit? Because that's where the personal stigmas in the workforce already are for men. That's, a lot of the reasons why men don't disclose is the perceived lack of productivity or stigma or bias that comes with sharing based on performance. And performance is a score. And so we need to, turn off your scoreboard, because in parenthood, there can't be any. And then I think a really big one, and even for mothers, is know your scarf, right? And know what your triggers and rewards are, especially as a father, and how it relates to your scarf. And so know that for yourself, because you're the only one who will know when you're being rewarded or triggered. So know that. So those are my 3.
Can you give us a quick scarf 101 for those listening?
Yes.
Of the scarf model?
And yes, absolutely. So the scarf model was created by David Rock. And it's a social relationship study or model, and based on 5 domains of how we are all rewarded and triggered. And so the 5 domains are status, certainty, autonomy, relatability, and fairness. And how you order your scarf is how you will be triggered or rewarded. So for me, mine is very much autonomy. So I am rewarded with autonomy. But when somebody is like, you should do this, then I can feel like my blood boil, because it's like, don't tell me what to do. Like, my trigger is also autonomy. And so when you remove it, like, go away. And status is ranking or hierarchy, right? And so how your scarf orders, you'll have a different scarf for different people in different relationships, but for the most part, it stays consistent. And then it's just how you get rewarded and triggered. And knowing that can very much redirect certain conversations or confrontations, or even your own frustration, and keep it to a neutral, no scoreboard zone.
Yeah.
Where you're not triggered, because nothing good comes from being triggered a lot of the time.
I have to go back to the scarf model. Yeah, something that you mentioned, like, yep, that completely relates. I want to pull up. Let's see, how can I pull up? Present. I want to pull up your website.
Okay.
Let me do that. Chrome tab. Perfect. So here you are. This is your website, right?
Yes.
Those watching, protect their cry when they tell you they are scared. Believe them. Can you tell me more about that?
So I swear I feel like I was a neuroscientist in a previous life. But babies only know to communicate through crying. And part, bath time has always been a very low value experience, because we baths are necessary. And as adults, we can do it with our eyes closed, right? Like, we can bathe ourselves, we can bathe our standing children with our eyes closed, because we forgot about that first step of it. And research has shown that our brains are 80% developed between the ages of 0 and 3. And the more you can nurture connection and attachment and trust, the stronger and more resilient that infant's mental health will be. And so when I say protect their cry, a lot of babies cry at bath time. It is a very distressing, vulnerable moment. And so for us, it's, if we know that from 0 to 3, 80% of our child's brain is being formed, and our goal, as much as we possibly can, is to empower them to use their communication, which is crying, for when they are in need, and that need will be responded to.
Yes.
How do we bring it to bath time, where the majority, cry? And babies have, you could have a baby with a very low temperament, a very high temperament, and then depending on the moment, their temperament could be random. But we don't know that when they're little, because they can't talk. And so it's, how do we create this opportunity to nurture any temperament and really build that sense of connection and trust. Yeah. Because nobody's actually done it. Like the baby, the standard square hooded baby towel on the market today was invented in 1948, I think. And we know more, about babies, and like, everything's different. And yes. So it's why haven't we created this opportunity? We use baths for our own self-care and our own reset. And how do we do that for these tiny little humans who have no clue what is happening to them?
Yeah, it's true.
And how do we protect that cry at bath time?
That's beautiful. So we're coming to a close in our podcast session. Okay. I would like to wrap up with 2 questions. Tell me about your journey as an entrepreneur, as a mom. How did you get into this? It would probably be a whole separate podcast episode to talk about our journey as an entrepreneur. So the short version, how it's affected your relationship with your partner. And then at the end, I would like for people to know where they can find the towel, and also implement the program in their workplaces.
Yes, absolutely. So I have always had an entrepreneurial mindset. Everything that I have done, I've always tried to find a way to like make a side hustle or a business out of it. I went into engineering wanting to do prosthetics because my grandfather had lost his legs to diabetes. And that proved to be very challenging in the mechanical world. Everybody I went to university with wanted to be an F1 car mechanical engineer. So that when that shifted, I did chemical. I wanted to make makeup for pigmented skin. That, you know, and so everything I've done has been with an attempt to make like a side business out of it. I started One Berry kind of in the throes of motherhood, because I was doing bath time, and you know, my engineering questioning came in and said, why is this the way it is, and why hasn't it been improved? And that really is what started the journey. But what really supported it was all my engineering experience in oil and gas in Calgary was business development. And so because I had that skill, I mean, our skills as engineers are transferable to any industry, but it really made that transition from oil and gas to baby a lot easier, because I had a very good idea about the business development aspect, the sales aspect, the problem solving aspect on a big picture, just like I did in oil and gas. And it's funny, my husband is an entrepreneur as well. He owns a security business, but he's a service, right? So he's a service business. I'm a product business, and the dynamic, when we've had our first two kids, he was in the throes of building his business. So I was the default parent. And it was fine. You know, I worked remotely. I was the default parent. He built his business. And then when his business, he kind of hit the holy grail of just being able to run it. We had my third, and he became the default parent. And the biggest thing for me was letting go of my way. And him stepping up to being in charge, right? Because like that shift in dynamic happened even for us, because I worked and he was the default parent, and we've been able to make it very much work, but we've had to figure out, like I have figured out his scarf as a dad, as a human. I know what mine are. We had to have the scoreboard talk, because we got, when you're in the throes of all this stuff, everybody's like, well, I mowed the lawn. Well, I did the dishes. Or it's like, I'm tired. Well, I'm tired. And it's like, oh, this is not helping. And so we had to go through the scoreboard talk and been like, listen, like, if we're not going to do it just because we're in it together, like, why are we keeping score? Like, I know that like the 100%, they always say like bring 50-50, but it's like, no, like sometimes I could bring 30 and I'd be like, listen, I need your 70. And sometimes he would walk in the door and I'd be like, ooh, he's maybe a 20%er tonight. And so it's like, okay, I know this, and how do we get to 100 together? And I think that's been a big part of how we've been able to navigate. Of course, I probably am the leader in that, but it keeps the thriving together a possibility, because it's not all for one, it's all for all, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I was having these observations with my husband, and many conversations, and for us, it was leading into our strengths. There's a season of life where I wanted him to take over parts of the operations of our house, but we realized I'm much better at the strategy and the visioning. He's quite solid at the day-to-day stable implementation process, whereas I'm very creative. I like to try new things, but when you set a course and a strategy, you can't always be changing it. In my mind, it can feel like I'm improving things, but I'm at the risk of going 100 miles per hour trying to drive, but he's going to be really good at that implementation. So there's tension that dissolved when we realized, well, let's lean into our strengths. It's not about you necessarily taking over the parts that I'm really, really good at. It's about how do we leverage our strengths as a team. And in fact, I think that scarf model would be fun to do as couples.
Yes, absolutely. To know.
Yeah. And how
absolutely.
to know how what triggers you and motivates you. So last question to wrap up, where can people get their hands on I'm not sure if I was I said Oneberry, but you intone it a little bit differently. Maybe it's just my French Montrealer accent.
Yeah, no, it is. It's Oneberry. That's exactly right. Oneberry.
Okay.
And so if it's just for yourselves or people that you know and love, oneberry.ca, you can find all of our products. If you would love to present it or share it with your place of work to empower, a bigger space for in family intersectionality, you can reach us at hello@oneberry.ca. We do have a contact form under corporate on our website, and then you can get in touch with us, and we can share resources with you, or even just start the conversation.
Awesome. And tell me about the name, actually. How did you come up with the name?
So with my first, I saw my 7-week scan at 7 weeks. And at 7 weeks, babies' fetuses are the size of a berry, a blueberry. And so this was the first grandbaby to my husband's side of the family. And my father-in-law was like, oh, let's call baby Barry. And so we called baby Barry the whole pregnancy. And when I started Oneberry, it was at the beginning, it was very much like, oh, well, she's my Oneberry. And that inspired, this journey. But as we grew, it was most people will have a Oneberry moment, whether it's seeing an ultrasound at 7 weeks or realizing they've missed a period at 7 weeks. They will have that Oneberry moment. And that, it's kind of the tip off to, there's a lot that goes into parenthood from that point, but that's like that's the moment. That's the moment where it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be a mom or a dad or whatever. And so it's evolved to that, but it's that Oneberry moment that we all share as parents.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to have this conversation with you. And again, for our listeners, I'm Kenya Romanovska, host of the Engineer Your Success, Leadership, and Life Harmony Like a Mother show. And thank you for laughing with me as I fumbled through the beginning of the introduction, because that's the reality as parents, as caregivers. Sometimes we don't sleep a full night, or we challenged and pushed ourselves like I did the last week. And I choose to show up and show you that it's okay to fumble your way through things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Kenya.
Backstage in just a moment to thank you personally.